Welcome to NewsNation's Backscroll, where we look back at our major news coverage on the most important topics and personalities of our time.
Tensions rising, though, even higher between the U.S. and China regarding House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's possible trip to Taiwan. China state media now saying if U.S. fighter jets escort Pelosi's plane into Taiwan, China considers it an invasion and is even threatening to shoot it down. China says Taiwan is part of its territory, while Taiwan says it is an independent nation. NewsNation's Kelly Meyer joining us now from D.C. So, Kelly, a lot of tension really building here.
Yeah, that's right, Nicole. And the White House continues to insist the House Speaker's trip is hypothetical, but the threats from China are quite real. Pelosi set to leave today for a multi-day trip to Asia with stops in Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, and Singapore. Now, whether she stops in Taiwan remains to be seen.
Today, the nuclear-powered supercarrier, the USS Ronald Reagan, sailing in the South China Sea amid rising tension between America and China. The Defense Department saying the deployment of the aircraft carrier and her strike group were planned and routine. The Chinese claiming the U.S. is flexing its military might and is threatening peace between the two countries.
No one should underestimate the determination and ability of more than 1.4 billion Chinese people to defend its national sovereignty and territorial integrity.
China also warning the U.S. over Taiwan as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi departs for a tour of Asia. A potential stop in Taiwan still up in the air. Pelosi facing a barrage of questions today, but not confirming a visit to the island. China considers Taiwan part of its territory. Taiwan claims its independence.
I'm very excited should we go to the countries that you'll be hearing about along the way.
Today, National Security Council spokesman John Kirby saying the speaker doesn't need their approval to travel overseas, but it's routine to provide her with a military aircraft. Chinese state media warning if U.S. fighter jets escort Pelosi's plane into Taiwan, it's an invasion, suggesting it would forcibly respond to Pelosi's plane or U.S. fighter jets with warning shots and tactical movements, and threatening it may, quote, then shoot them down. The White House telling us today they haven't seen any physical indications of any unexpected military action from China, adding the rhetoric coming out of China is unnecessary. President Xi warning on a call with Biden Thursday that the U.S. should not, quote, play with fire with regard to Taiwan.
And in another warning to the U.S., China's foreign minister today saying a visit to Taiwan by Speaker Pelosi would challenge China's red line. And any challenge to the red line would be met with, quote, resolute countermeasures.
President Xi Jinping met with the Prime Minister of Vietnam in Hanoi earlier today. Why do you care? Because Xi Jinping's trying to get the Vietnamese on their side. This is what President Trump, who found it important enough to respond to, had to say of the meeting in the Oval Office.
We lost with China over the Biden years trillions of dollars on trade, trillions of dollars, and he let them fleece us. And we can't do that anymore. And you know what? I don't blame China at all. I don't blame President Xi. I like him. He likes me. I mean, you know, who knows? Who the hell cares? I don't blame China. I don't blame Vietnam. I see their meeting today. Is that wonderful? That's a lovely meeting. The meeting, like trying to figure out how do we screw the United States of America?
Fact check, true. China announced it would stop sending the United States rare earth minerals today. So remember the supply chain problems of the pandemic we all dealt with. China is now creating a supply chain problem with critical components for high-tech weapon systems, fighter planes, and medical equipments. It matters. With us now, Evelyn Farkas, Executive Director of the McCain Institute and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for President Obama, Gordon Chang, U.S.-China Relations Analyst, Gatestone Institute Senior Fellow, I think one of the smartest people on China around. Gordon, China's been preparing for this day, I think, for what, 30 years? What does Xi Jinping want?
Well, Xi Jinping wants to rule the world, but his intermediate goals are to destroy the United States, and he wants to do that with trade. And as you point out, he's got this rare earth embargo. The problem for the Chinese is that they tried this tactic in 2010 with Japan, and their embargo collapsed within 2 months. And the reason is that these don't work, because although we've got to buy, the Chinese have got to sell. So they will sell onto the open market. They'll maybe even sell to us directly under the table, but we will get what we need. And really, this is not a card for China. The problem for Xi Jinping is that the cards he has to play hurt him or as much or more than it hurts us. And then we've got a lot of things which we can hurt him, and he has no answers to those things.
You seem to say that we have the upper hand.
Yeah, of course. First of all, we're the larger economy. Our economy is, their economy is less than 2/3 the size of ours. They're the trade surplus country. Last year, their merchandise trade surplus was $295.4 billion. They've got everything to lose in all of this. So, yeah, we've got the high cards, and the Chinese know it. And the only card that China has, it's trying now to use Wall Street, farmers, C-suites, you name it, to try to get Trump to preemptively surrender. You know, Trump is not the type of guy who's going to give up the high cards when he knows that he has the leverage. So this is important to him, as Bill O'Reilly just told you. I think he's going to stay the course.
Evelyn, think what you want about Trump's tactics. We talked about those in the past segment. Bowing down to China has been a bipartisan issue over the past 30 or 40 years, not confronting China. There was always this idea that we could bring them into the fold. You got to give Trump credit right now for trying here, right?
Well, I think, Leland, he tried in the first term. Remember, he had also applied sanctions against China, but that time it was in a much more precise fashion, and he explained that he was doing it based on national security considerations. And it was so convincing that, of course, the Biden administration continued those tariffs, and to this day, all of those tariffs are still in place. The problem with the current tariff policy, if you will, is that it's not, as you said, not clearly articulated in the earlier segment, and they're across the board. And I would say, you know, to add on to what Gordon said, I think both sides have a lot to lose. And, you know, I'm a political scientist, not an economist, so I won't talk in dollars and cents, but I will say that we are so, you know, interwoven with the Chinese in terms of our economy, in terms of the bond market, where the Chinese have a great deal of leverage that they haven't used yet, right? So it's hard for me to say that anyone's going to be a winner. And frankly, what I worry about is protectionism. You know, if you have an arms race, if you will, on protectionism, who can have the highest tariffs, you lead to a situation where the global economic order unravels, and you could very much see real armed conflict resulting. And why do I say that? Because we have history as an example that's happened before in the past.
Gordon, Xi Jinping said basically as much, right? That there's no winners in this trade or tariff war. That said, I think he is trying to, you say, fight this kind of hybrid warfare against America. One of the places on social media where suddenly my social media feeds are now filled with videos of people talking, clearly people meant to be Chinese, about how much cheaper it is to make stuff in China. Take a look.
You're saying you're the supplier behind all these beauty accessories for those big luxury brands? The all cosmetic products are actually produced by Taiho Group, which is also the supplier behind Lancome and Loewe.
For the past more than 30 years, we have been the OEM factory for most of the luxury brands around the world: Gucci, Prada, Coach.
What's the game plan here? Because I don't think this is a coincidence.
No, it's not a coincidence. And when you have Chinese propaganda, you can usually understand that they're sensitive about something, and that usually the truth is the opposite of what they say. So, yeah, China has been making a lot of Gucci handbags, but the point is you can do that a lot cheaper in Vietnam. The Vietnamese know that. They'd rather deal with America than with China. And by the way, Vietnam doesn't have territorial disputes with us, but they have a lot of territorial disputes with China. They've gone to, matter of fact, the last time China went to real war was in 1979 against Vietnam. So clearly, you know, Xi Jinping can go to Southeast Asia, but those countries don't want to deal with him.
Yeah, fair enough. Evelyn, last 30 seconds to you. You think about the size of the Chinese military. As of 2024, their Navy, China 235 warships, U.S. 219. Their army is smaller, but it is still than it was, say, in the 1970s, but still 2 million active military personnel, much larger than the United States. Are they gearing up for a war?
Well, they certainly want to deter us from fighting them if they seize Taiwan, for example, if they want to cut off access through the South China Sea. So they're gearing up for a war, yes. I will say that we still have an advantage in terms of quality of our military. I am worried that there are reports of increasing numbers of Chinese personnel fighting in Ukraine. That means they're actually getting battlefield experience, which the Chinese do not have, because, you know, Gordon's
They
example
haven't fought a war, yeah, for a long time.
one. And the skirmishes with India on the border don't count either.
Well, it's fascinating. What you just said about them having soldiers in Ukraine and why is terrifying to anybody who knows anything about military training. Evelyn, Gordon, thank you both. Incredible insight. We appreciate it.
We got to get to our developing news this morning. China is promising not to back down as President Trump threatens to jump tariffs on Chinese imports to 104%. The president warning China that a new 50% tariff is coming tomorrow if it does not drop its retaliatory tariffs against the United States today. President Trump remaining undeterred by a panicking stock market in this tariff battle. Some good news, though. Futures are in the green this morning, following a volatile start to the work week on Wall Street. NewsNation's Kelly Meyer has more from Washington this morning. And Kelly, what's China's response to the president's latest threat?
So good morning, Anna. The trade war with China intensifying this morning. Beijing threatening to, quote, fight to the end after President Trump hit back with the threat of an additional 50% tariff if China doesn't back off its retaliatory 34% tariff set to hit Thursday. China saying the U.S. threat is a, quote, mistake on top of a mistake. And Beijing says Washington's tariff exposes the, quote, blackmailing nature of the U.S. and that China will never accept this, they say. President Trump on Monday hopeful that President Xi will change his mind.
I have a great relationship with President Xi. I hope it's going to stay that way. I have great respect for China, but they can't do this.
So while China isn't coming to the negotiating table, several other countries are. Israel's prime minister there on Monday trying to strike a deal with Washington, offering to eliminate the trade deficit and trade barriers with the U.S. Trump directing his Treasury secretary to begin working with Japan and lead negotiations with the U.S. trade representative. And the European Union says it's ready to negotiate a zero-for-zero tariff resolution on industrial goods, though Trump said Monday that offer isn't good enough. President Trump pledging that there will be no pause in tariffs, but says he is open to making a deal. Anna?
Yeah, Kelly, and we know one of the president's top advisors is trying to push back against the tariff plan, right?
Yeah, that's right. Elon Musk, the billionaire businessman and owner of Tesla, has long opposed tariffs and is reportedly making a direct appeal to President Trump to reverse his tariff decision. The Washington Post reporting that Musk made personal appeals to President Trump over the weekend. It goes on to say that the attempted intervention, confirmed by two people familiar with the matter who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss private talks, has not brought success so far. Musk also sparred on social media with one of the president's lead advisors on trade. This shows the biggest break between Trump and Musk, someone who spent nearly $300 million to support Trump's presidential run. Musk opposed tariffs in Trump's first term and says he supports a free trade zone between the U.S. and Europe. Anna?
All right, a little bit of infighting there. Kelly Meyer, thank you so much, live from Washington, D.C.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. Also, don't forget to click that red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.
The Biden administration is busy working right now to track down Chinese malware it believes has infected power, communications, and water systems that feed U.S. military bases around the world. That's according to the New York Times. One congressional official telling the paper that the malware is a, quote, ticking time bomb. The comments coming on the heels of a recently announced $345 million military aid package for Taiwan. NewsNation senior national security contributor, retired Air Force Lieutenant General Richard Newton joining us right now. General, good morning. If these reports are legit, whether it's retaliation over the U.S. defending Taiwan, this aid package, or not, does it signal that China is emboldened to target us?
I think so. And good morning, Adrian. China has been labeled the #1 cyberspace adversary of the United States. And so there's really, it's new in the media in terms of, our awareness, as you reported so clearly this morning. But this has been an ongoing challenge. It certainly was even when I was on active duty several years or so ago. That China is growing in terms of their capability, not only in terms of land and sea and air, but also in cyberspace as well. And as you alluded to, these intrusions, these hackings, if you will, that could even be focused on military installations that could have an impact on the power grid in and around the base, the communications and the water supply and so forth. So it's legit. It's also the sign of times in terms of their capabilities, their reach into the United States, as well as our allies and partners, throughout the world.
But when you say the sign of the times, obviously we've seen other nations, including Russia, instigate different cyber warfare. Is that a way to describe it? Cyber warfare versus just somebody or a nation that is targeting us, with some sort of terror or complication, or, what would you describe this as?
I would use your words. Those are perfect words. Cyber warfare. We are in, they have offensive capabilities, certainly that they want to go in and exploit, even down to installations. When I was commander at Minot Air Force Base up in North Dakota, we shared the local power grid, the water, and the communications capabilities. And as they infiltrate, as we've now determined, in around these installations in the United States, but also in other overseas installations. They're infiltrating our capabilities and our reliance on local services to provide us, as I mentioned, communications, electric, and water, and so forth. And so, yeah, it is. It's not just intrusions. I think it's a great term. It is cyber warfare that they're using, and they are, in this case, our #1 adversary in doing this, Adrian.
China is also accusing the U.S. and Taiwan of aggravating the threat of war on the island. Was there a significant move outside of that cash and that military aid package that provoked Beijing?
Well, there's ongoing concern with China. They're modernizing their military. They're trying to reach beyond just the Asia-Pacific region, but around the world as well. That aid package that you referred to is actually a congressionally approved presidential drawdown authority. Buzzwords, I understand, but this is money that can be earmarked for Taiwan to the tune of about $345 million. It's really all defensive capabilities. It's ammunitions and defense systems and so forth that really will help Taiwan defend itself. It's not offensive in nature, it's defensive. And we're showing China that we are committed to shoring up the defenses of Taiwan, but also we're showing our allies, Japan and South Korea and Australia and others in the region, that the U.S. Is going to maintain its position and support its allies and friends in the region. My last point is the objective here is not to, as I mentioned, not to give Taiwan offensive capabilities, but make it that porcupine-like effect that would really deter and dissuade China from wanting to even think about invading Taiwan. It's to help them protect and defend their homeland.
Short question, need a short answer. Is the U.S. military to defend Taiwan at this point, especially with what we're doing to aid Ukraine?
We're stretched. Ukraine and Russia is certainly very much a focus on that. But the fact if we would try to, we could do one major war, in my view, to do two in this case would be very difficult at this point.
Lieutenant General Richard Newton, thank you as always. I want to get back to that reported Chinese malware case that may have the ability to cut off U.S. military bases from power and communication systems, not just in one location, but all around the country and all around the globe. The New York Times reporting that the Biden administration is working to track down this cyber warfare. It believes that Beijing has the power to disrupt those operations in the event of armed conflict. Over the weekend, Chinese officials did accuse the U.S. and Taiwan of turning the democratic island of Taiwan into a, quote, powder keg and ammunition depot. That follows the U.S. announcement of a new $345 million military aid package. I know that's a mouthful. I told you a lot already. Let's dive in here with Mark Esper, who served as U.S. Secretary of Defense during the Trump administration. Always good to see you, Secretary. But I got to find out, in terms of how legitimate these claims are about Chinese malware, on a scale of 1 to 10, is it true? Do you believe that this is actually happening? And if so, how dire would it be for our military?
Yeah, look, it's a very serious concern. It's something that we worked on, looked at closely during my tenure. I've always said since my days in office that I thought the first shots of an opening conflict with China would be in both space and cyberspace. And with regard to this particular article, that plays out some scenarios where we were concerned that the Chinese might have embedded malware that could shut down the electrical grid surrounding an Air Force base, an Army base. They could shut down or upset our communications networks that would deploy our troops from bases to ports. Because you've got to keep in mind that the military, certainly the Army, is mostly based in the United States, so it deploys to a future fight. So if the Chinese can disrupt those things at home, then that would be problematic. You know, when I was Secretary of the Army, we actually had a program underway to make sure that our bases had independent energy sources cut off from the broader grid so that we can maintain our operations when something happened, whether it was a Chinese malware or whether it was just a natural disaster. So these are real concerns and something we have to plan and prepare for and keep working on.
Is there any connection between this malware and TikTok with all the attention that that's received over the past year?
I think it's part of a broader spectrum of initiatives that the Chinese are out there doing, trying to gather intelligence, secure information, build large databases by which they can understand, what America is doing, maybe their connections, connectivities. With TikTok, there's a big concern too about their ability to influence social media and what they put out to our youth or the people who use TikTok. So look, it's a broader spectrum. The Chinese are very clever, very strategic, very patient, and they've put a lot of resources into cyber operations.
I want to ask why we're just learning about this now, but I kind of already know the answer, but why don't you give any insights you have?
Well, we've actually been talking about this for years. A lot of concern about Chinese malware, Russian malware, North Korean malware. It's been out there. It's just getting attention from this article. But, this is something we have to pay very close attention to. Again, the Chinese put a lot of resources to this. This is in some ways considered an Achilles heel for the United States. That's why, there's been a push for many, many years to get broader public-private cooperation within the United States on these matters so we can be more quickly alerted to possible malware, cyber intrusions, those things, and we can push back on the Chinese. Part of it, too, involves us picking up more of the offense when it comes to the Chinese and pushing back on them as well quite aggressively.
I just have one more question for you. Whenever we bring up these stories, we're talking about this particular incident or we're talking about one particular threat, in this case, cyber warfare. What position are we in militarily? What is the state of our troops? Are we in a position to actually do what the Biden administration is actually saying we might have to, which is boots on the ground for Taiwan while we're still helping Ukraine fight their war against Russia?
Well, first of all, we have the best cyber capabilities in the world, bar none. So you should rest comfortably in that fact. I think, with regard to the ability to project power around the world, we still have that capability, whether or not there is a war in Ukraine. We have the means to do it. I think the administration belatedly is making some important initiatives now in conjunction with Congress to build up our defense industrial base, to stockpile arms and ammunition and material. That's critical because the vulnerability of that base has been exposed here with the war in Ukraine. So we still have all the capabilities to project the power we need to do, but this is something we need to watch very carefully and prepare for because it is an asymmetric attack that the Chinese could perpetrate on us in times of conflict or leading up to conflict.
Officials in China are ratcheting up the rhetoric against the U.S. Combative tone comes as both countries break on Taiwan, COVID-19, the war in Ukraine. The Chinese foreign minister says there will be, quote, conflict and confrontation between the two nations if things don't improve. The minister went on to say competition between the two countries is a reckless gamble. The State Department responded saying that they want to peacefully coexist with China. Joining us this morning to talk more about the rising tensions between the two world superpowers is Robert Daly, director of the Kissinger Center Institute of China and the U.S. at the Wilson Center. Good morning to you, Mr. Daly. Thank you for being with us. So Chinese President Xi Jinping made a rare statement suggesting the U.S. is trying to encircle China. How do you measure the temperature in the room between these two world powers right now?
Our relationships are bad and are getting worse. And I think that it is true that if they continue along this track, if we cannot arrest this fall through diplomacy, then the odds of conflict between the two countries will go up.
What's the solution?
Well, we don't know. We don't have a full solution. Nobody can see it. We're in too deep a hole. And of course, the old advice is when that happens, step one is just stop digging. And in the case of U.S.-China relations, I think what that means is we have to begin to talk to each other regularly. Our leaders need to meet. They need to discuss military security matters, especially as they relate to Taiwan. They need to talk about our economic relationship. They need to talk about technology, and they need to talk about world order, international institutions, because right now our competition comprises all of these regions. So we need to cool down the rhetoric on both sides, and we need to start meeting with each other. Now, that doesn't mean that things are going to go smoothly. This is going to be, in all likelihood, a decades-long competition characterized by extreme distrust and high costs, but we need to talk.
Yeah, it is a complex relationship at best. Let's talk a little bit more about Taiwan. What are the benefits of a face-to-face meeting between what we're hearing, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and Taiwan's president, happening here in the U.S. versus happening in Taiwan as what was originally planned?
Well, this was originally an announcement that Kevin McCarthy had made. Taiwan had never planned on it. McCarthy had said he would go because Nancy Pelosi had gone when she was the Speaker of the House. Taiwan then made it clear that actually a visit by McCarthy is not in Taiwan's interests. It may make Kevin McCarthy or the other members of Congress who go with him feel good. They get to feel self-righteous. We stand by the free people of Taiwan. But the free people of Taiwan are saying, no, this really puts us in more danger. So why don't we meet in California instead? Now, China will still be angry about that meeting. They will be angry that Tsai Ing-wen, the president of Taiwan, is on American soil. They will be angry that she is giving a speech at the Reagan Library. But it isn't quite as egregious from Beijing's point of view as Kevin McCarthy being in Taiwan. Now, obviously, we can't be driven entirely by what makes China angry. China is nearly constantly angry if things don't go its way. The real test of whether it makes sense for somebody like McCarthy or other American leaders to go to Taiwan is whether it is conducive to the long-term security of the people of Taiwan. And in this case, Taiwan has said clearly, no, thanks for your good intentions, but we'd rather you didn't land here.
Well, and China has increased its military spending, that we know, by about 10%. Does that suggest that they are getting closer, getting ready to do something in regards to Taiwan?
It suggests that they're getting ready to be ready. We know that they're increasing their military expenditures, as are we. Both sides are largely militarizing this conflict. Both sides are guilty of this in different ways. The fact that Xi Jinping wants to have the option of moving decisively on Taiwan, while extremely worrisome, is not the same thing as Xi Jinping's decision to move decisively on Taiwan. And so we need to delay the day on which he makes that decision, absolutely through deterrence, but also through diplomacy and on articulating some form of a one China policy that we believe in and that we will abide by, because we have been really whittling away at the China policy for the one China policy for the past few years.
And just one more question on Taiwan. Washington's stance and policy in regards to Taiwan has been described as strategic ambiguity. President Biden has said that if China invades Taiwan, the U.S. Will defend Taiwan. Which is it? Where does it land in between?
Well, President Biden has said some version of this 4 times, and every time his staff walks it back. So it's not yet strategic clarity. We haven't formally declared that we would defend Taiwan, although we're getting awfully close. But the fact is that if China decided to move on Taiwan, regardless of what President Biden has said, they would assume American involvement. Their military planners, like ours, would make worst-case assumptions, and the assumption for China is that the United States would get involved, again, regardless of what President Biden does or does not say.
And when you're speaking about ambiguity, the same could be said about China's relationship with Russia right now as well. Have to talk about that next time, Robert. We're out of time. Robert Daly, thank you. Appreciate it. Let's bring in retired Lieutenant General Richard Newton to talk about it this morning. He's a former U.S. Air Force Assistant Vice Chief of Staff and newly named Senior National Security Contributor here at NewsNation. Good to see you. Thank you for being with us. Where's your read on this and U.S.-China relations as China bolsters its military spending?
Well, Marty, I certainly agree with your comments and excellent reporting by Allison, by the way, that underscores the fact that U.S.-China relations, I think, are really indeed at a low point. There's lots of challenges there. Most recently, obviously, the Chinese spy balloon, challenge we had when they parked that thing over Montana for 3 days and so forth. But the global nature and the capability and the reach of China is ever expanding. And Allison reported that 7% increase in military funding is not just necessarily for troops and more blankets. That's to modernize their air, sea, land, and cyber forces and their nuclear forces at the strategic level. That should be very, very significant, point of reference for the U.S. as we move forward into what is beginning to be a fairly turbulent 2023.
Well, and then we're hearing of these cranes and another component to China trying to spy on U.S. ports. What do you make of that?
It's remarkable. It's almost breathtaking. Again, I mentioned the Chinese spy balloon. If you go back to 2019 under the Trump administration, the Huawei phone issue they had, with what was then the largest cell phone production maker, of cell phones is based in China. And so we tried to outlaw that. Now you've got these cranes, which could serve as a sensor post for Chinese surveillance and reconnaissance. So what's really happening also is really the global nature of espionage is increasing significantly. And these cranes are a good example of that. I mean, there's some cranes down here. I live down here in South Florida in Palm Beach County, but they're all over the United States and really all over the world. ZPMC is manufacturing these cranes, according to a report from the Wall Street Journal, and it states that they make 70% of these huge cranes, and they're dispatched over 100 nations. So it's concerning that it can be used as a method, a very keen method of surveilling not only the United States but also other nations as well.
President Biden's words on Taiwan have been forceful, but would you like to see a stronger response from the United States with relations regarding China?
Absolutely, because tensions have really been stepped up in the Taiwan Straits. That's about 100 miles of distance between China mainland and Taiwan, and so there have been multiple intrusions of near Taiwan airspace. There's other aspects of really significant saber rattling that we haven't seen for years in and around Taiwan. And so I believe that we have to be on our guard, not only certainly militarily, especially with the 7th Fleet down in Yokosuka, Japan, but also our bomber forces that are positioned outside near in Guam area, but also diplomatically, certainly on guard from an information warfare standpoint, and also that we make sure that we stand very, very strong with our key allies there, being specifically Japan and South Korea.
And you've got the military side of this, but also the economic side. Would you like to see more action from the United States to decrease our reliance on China? I had a guest earlier talking about just the education sector, how far the U.S. is behind China. What more should we be doing in that realm?
Yeah, absolutely, Marnie. The economic aspect of this is I think, going to be really key. The fact that we're able to, again, we have to become much less reliant on China, from cell phones all the way to other capabilities that they provide, as well as we need to up our own game in terms of being able to manufacture here in the United States capabilities, certainly in technology and other sciences, so that not only we can provide for ourselves, but we can also provide as an export nation to other friends and allies and trading partners, so they're not reliant on China. China is going after the United States and trying to usurp us as the global superpower in not only military, but economic, but technological, ideological, diplomatic, all those cards are on the table. And as I mentioned earlier, it's breathtaking to me, and we've got to really watch this closely.
And on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, has China been too ambiguous on its stance?
I think they're being ambiguous by design. That's really the last card we played in terms of the what could be happening next in the Ukrainian conflict with Russia. Will or will they not provide arms to Russia? That's an unknown. But if they do, that will be a game changer. However, China also wants to make sure that it is it has leverage over Russia, but also wants to keep the United States bogged down in providing our own weapons, exhaust not only our weapons production, but perhaps our enthusiasm for supporting Ukraine. We've got to continue to stand behind Ukraine and lead the NATO effort and so forth. because how Ukraine-Russia goes will certainly determine next steps. To go back to the Taiwan situation, whether or not China feels emboldened enough, as President Xi has publicly announced that he is preparing his military to invade Taiwan by the year 2027. That will be a bloody, difficult battle, and will be impacting not only in terms of the region, but certainly a global impact economically as well.
Yeah, a daunting thought. Retired Lieutenant General Richard Newton, thank you. Good to see you.
China sending a warning to the U.S. amid tensions in Asia. It comes as the U.S. also monitoring an unusual buildup of Russian activity near the Ukrainian border. NewsNation correspondent Kelly Meyer live from Washington. So, Kelly, how concerned are Pentagon officials?
Good evening, Nicole. Well, military tensions between the U.S. and two powerful adversaries, Russia and China, appears to be steadily increasing. Yesterday, I reported that China is building mock-ups of U.S. Navy ships for target practice. Today, Chinese diplomats are lashing out at the U.S. naval presence in the South China Sea, warning of a potential misfire that could heighten tension in the increasingly volatile region. Now, the U.S. testing the Iron Dome defense system in Guam, a U.S. Pacific Island territory potentially vulnerable to attacks from Chinese cruise missiles. Iron Dome is the U.S. defense system Israel has used to intercept more than 1,500 missiles fired from the Gaza Strip. And Nicole, all of this is happening as Russia is again making ominous moves in this dispute with Ukraine, moving troops and tanks closer to the border, raising concerns of Russia's buildup and potential invasion in support of rebellious factions sympathetic to Moscow.
So, Kelly, what is the U.S. saying about all of this?
Well, we know the CIA Director William Burns recently went to Moscow to meet with top advisors of President Putin. And while President Biden recently met face-to-face with Putin in June in Geneva, he has yet to meet with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping since becoming president. Xi skipped last week's summit in Europe as he prepares for a Communist Party Central Committee meeting this week, paving the way for his third term as China's leader. And Nicole, tonight there are reports that President Biden will have his long-awaited first meeting, a virtual summit with President Xi, as soon as next week. Nicole?
All right, we will certainly see what happens. Kelly, thank you.
And meanwhile, as tensions continue rising between the U.S. and China, questions over what it means for the many products we depend on that are manufactured there. It ranges from iPhones to electric vehicle batteries, car dashboards, desktop computers, headphones, and so much more. As the Wall Street Journal writes, quote, fears of military conflict and increasing security worries have some U.S. manufacturers reevaluating their reliance on China. Executives are plotting alternate supply chains or devising products that can be made elsewhere should China's hundreds of thousands of factories become inaccessible. Joel Rubin was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Obama administration, and Rina Shah, a Republican strategist. Thank you both for being here. Joel, I'll start with you. How much of a risk is U.S. dependence on China becoming?
Well, Kelly, it's great to be with you and with Rena. Look, we have a tight relationship with China economically and have had it for years, and it's become very problematic in recent years in particular as China has been asserting itself militarily across the Pacific. And what that's done is put stress, as you described, on our economic relationship, one where there's not a lot of confidence about the future with China. And so that's why we need to be investing here at home. We've seen a significant amount of investment made by the Biden administration through congressional legislation on domestic manufacturing, on semiconductors, on clean energy, to try to bring economic investment back home that currently has been and is being accelerated and implemented in China. That's the way to avoid this clash. But there is a clash coming. It's an ongoing tension point, and it does put stress on our economic relationship.
You know, and Rena, it appears that this relationship isn't getting any warmer or fuzzier. The defense leaders in China saying no thanks to meeting with our leaders here. What is the solution? Should American companies leave China? And can they even do that at this point?
Certainly, I think at this point, this is a delicate situation for American companies because we're headed down this road, and we have been for many years, of greater dependency on the Chinese. As we all know, the Chinese don't have a genuine private sector. American companies really feel conflicted, I think, many of them who want to do the right thing socially. But speaking on corporate levels, they can't do that. They're too tied. They really feel this dependence. For example, the latest headline I just read this week was Lululemon, a very popular athletic wear retailer based here in the United States, is so codependent on China that its shares are climbing in price because of the outlook in China. So the lift there that comes to American companies from a Chinese outlook is just really where they are left in that very tenuous situation. I say this to the American consumer. It's important to buy American when you can, but we as a society have become so dependent on fast and cheap. And that's where China has really taken advantage of us. So China's posturing towards us. They feel that they have the upper hand right now. I don't feel that war is inevitable. I think it's about the choices we make. And the UK Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, said as much about the UK as well. He thinks that the UK and its allies like the United States can make choices that do not lead us towards a greater conflict with China.
Okay, that makes sense. So, Joel, under a worst case scenario that China does attack Taiwan, of course, an area we vowed to defend, how would that affect our supply chain immediately?
Well, the last thing anyone wants is a war between the United States and China, and there would be one if China were to attack Taiwan. Certainly, the United States military support for Taiwan would come in, like we're seeing with Ukraine. But that would be cataclysmic for the global economy. We're not looking to that either for a strategic gain or benefit, but as much just for protecting an ally. And that's, to Rena's point, what wants to be and what we need to be avoiding. And that means, frankly, from an economic perspective, though, again, investing here at home, making sure that we're more balanced. Right now, China, if they do have the upper hand, as Rena's suggesting, and I think that is right, that is the attitude in Beijing, they need to understand that's not the case. And military threats are not going to get us there. It's going to be economic strength. It's going to be investment at home. It's going to be taking care of our education and our long-term economic prospects, and not depending on just the cheaper, quicker solution from abroad.
Yeah, certainly. It's going to have to be a long-term strategic plan. Joel Rubin and Rena Shah, thank you as always.